So I was in college, Taylor University. I was my senior year. I was the resident assistant. So I had a wing of young men under my care, and we were all very excited to finally get to go to our Thanksgiving break after some time through the fall semester. Finally, to get to have time back at home. So we all went away for our Thanksgiving break and came back. And there was a young man who was actually a pastoral ministries major, super nice. I mean, if you could imagine someone who is in pastoral ministries, like the iconic type of person, this would be that guy. Just a simple, kind individual. And he sang, he had a beautiful voice, and just very, very gentle, soft-spoken, so much of what I am. This was that guy. And we came back from Thanksgiving, and he had a cast on his arm, up to his elbow. And I said, man, what happened? Did you get in a turkey carving, competition? What took place? And he said, I punched my stepdad in the face. Wow. Happy Thanksgiving. Right? Something happened in this situation for this young guy. Super nice, super gentle, soft-spoken, loved Jesus. But something happened spending time with that individual. He didn't get into the details, but it was clear enough. Something made him upset. And he punched the guy and broke a bone in his hand. Is that acceptable? Probably not. Have you ever been there? Or wanted to be there? Maybe. Let me ask you, do you know that guy? Is there a fair? Thanks. Do you know that guy or that lady in your family? You know, when you get together, you're just like, wow, that person just kind of rubs me the wrong way. You know, kind of the cousin Eddie of the family. You know, those individuals, you just think, I have real trouble dealing with you. Could be a sibling that's very political. You can't have a conversation with the individual if they don't bring up something about a past president or a current president. You say, wow, I'm so tired of talking about the politics with this guy. Or an uncle who's bigoted, who just talks nasty, talks down into people, considers himself or herself better. Maybe it's a mother or a mother-in-law who keeps telling you the right way to cook the food, or the right way to discipline your children. Maybe it's not a family member at all. Maybe it's not even about Thanksgiving at all. Maybe it's a co-worker. Maybe it's a spouse. But that person in your life, you just realize you are incredibly difficult to deal with. Well, today we're beginning a 3-week series, just 3 weeks leading up to Thanksgiving, because I want this to be a time where we can prepare our hearts to deal with people in our lives that are not easy to deal with. And we're calling this series Thanks a Lot. We're actually going to be looking at the relationship between Abram, later named Abraham, and his nephew Lot. Thus, thanks a lot. And today we're looking at a lot of strife and selfishness. A lot of strife and selfishness. How do you deal with that lot in life? So let me ask you, who is your lot in life? Let me give you an overview of this story. It's found in Genesis at the very end of chapter 11, and then going all the way through what we're going to be looking at today, all the way through chapter 16. Now, we're not going to preach verse by verse on this, but we're going to cover this in a broad let me just tell you the story. This is only part of the story. We're going to finish the story next week and the following week. All right? So this is kind of the relationship between Abram, later become Abraham, and Lot. Okay, so at the end of Genesis chapter 11, which, by the way, Genesis chapter 11 is just it's a chapter of all of these descendants of a guy named Shem. Who was Shem? Shem was one of the three sons of Noah. Okay? And so he begins going through all of the lineage. These guys had these children, and this guy had these children, and it leads all the way to a guy named Terah. Now, Terah is the father of Abraham. All right? So we pick up in verse 27. These are the generations of Terah. Terah fathered Abram, Nahor, and Haran. So these three guys are brothers. And Haran is the father of Lot, which makes Abram, the uncle to Lot. Haran died in the presence of his father Terah. So Lot, at some point in his life, lost his dad. And so what we see then is in verse 31, Terah leaves their homeland, and he takes Abram, his son, Lot, his grandson, Abram's nephew, and Sarai. Sarai is married to Abram. And they go off, and it says in chapter 12 that they went and they took Lot with them. Chapter 12 is the call of Abram, where God says, I'm going to be your God, and your people are going to be my people. And it says in verse 4 that Abram was 75 years old. 75 years old when all of this started. So when you think of Uncle Abe and little Lot, don't think of Lot as a little kid who's just irritated. Right? Lot sits at the adult table now. Lot was probably maybe about my age, 45 to 55 years old. That's probably where Lot was. Abram, now 75 years old, and they go out. There's a whole situation in Egypt, if you remember that story, where Abram lies about Sarai. But through this whole process of their traveling, they're becoming very wealthy. Abram is becoming wealthy. He's becoming very rich. And along with him, because Lot is with him, Lot's just getting the benefits of all of this as well. So we pick up in chapter 13. So Abram went up from Egypt. They leave Egypt, he and his wife, and all they had, and Lot with him. So you see this relationship is very close. Lot is always with Abram. And they're leaving now from Egypt, and they're going out. And what happens in chapter 13 is that Abram's herdsmen, all the people who worked with the sheep and the goat, they were starting to bicker, and there was strife with Lot's herdsmen. Now, Abram had a lot of things, and Lot had also many cattle, it says, but their herdsmen were starting to bicker. So, verse 8, Abram said to Lot, let there be no strife between, look at this is important, no strife between you and me, and between your herdsmen and my herdsmen, because we are family, because we're kinsmen. So this issue of strife was not only between a herdsman, this issue of strife was between Lot and Abram themselves. And so, Abram says, look at this, all this land. Here we are. Separate yourself from me, in verse 9. If you take the left hand, then I will go to the right. If you want to go to the right, then I will go to the left. And Lot lifted up his eyes, and he saw that the Jordan Valley was well watered like the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt. Okay, so I want you to see this. Off to the left, right, is this land that is completely lush, well-watered, beautiful, like the garden of the Lord, always. So what does Lot take? That little turkey took the nice thing. On Little 8, you get the arrogant space. You go that way, I'm going to go this way. And so they did. But, verse 13, so Lot chose for himself the Jordan Valley. He went that way, and moved all the way out to Sodom. Verse 13, but the men of Sodom were wicked, great sinners against the Lord. But for Abram, he got to where he was going, and God said, lift up your eyes, look around, all of this is going to be for you. For all of the land, this is verse 15 in chapter 13, for all of the land that you see, I will give to you and to your offspring forever. Wow. But it's not done. Because in chapter 14, we see several kings coming together and coming into battle against the area where Lot was living. Sodom and Gomorrah included, and these kings invaded. And you look at verse 11 of chapter 14. So the enemy took all the possessions of Sodom and Gomorrah and all their provisions and went their way. They also took Lot, the son of Abram's brother, who was dwelling in Sodom, and his possessions, and went their way. Lot just got completely devastated. The enemy comes in, takes everything he has, takes their family, and they no longer have anything. But Abram isn't going to stand for that. Verse 14, when Abram heard that his kinsmen had been taken captive, he led forth his trained men, born in his house, 318 of them, and went in pursuit as far as Dan. And he divided his forces against them by night, he and his servants, and defeated them and pursued them to Hobah, north of Damascus. Then he brought back all the possessions, and also brought back his kinsman Lot with his possessions, and the women and the people. Abram comes back from that battle. This is when he meets Melchizedek, and he offers Melchizedek an offering, a tithe. And he says, I will not allow others to bless me and to give me things other than the Lord himself. I raise my hand to the Lord and bless him and worship him. And he has this interaction with Melchizedek. And then in chapter 15, God, in a powerful way, brings Abram into this covenant with him. Now, God already stated this covenant. You're going to be my people, I'm going to be your God. But now, he brings Abram into this covenant in a powerful way. And then in chapter 16, we see this, that it's not, in Abram's home, it's not all easy, right? Abram's thinking, well, if I'm going to have descendants, I'm not having any children with Sarai, my wife, because she can't have kids. And so Sarai says, well, why don't you go to Hagar and have a child with her? And so it says at the end of verse 2, and Abram listened to the voice of Sarai. So after Abram had lived 10 years in the land of Canaan, Sarai, Abram's wife, took Hagar and put her with Abram after 10 years. So 10 years of probably some discord, a little bit of stress in Abram's home in the midst of all of these other things that we've just read about. Abram was, he was there for 10 years, and at the end of chapter 16, it says when he was 86 years old, Ishmael was born. So, Abram and Lot have this relationship. Lot was, he grew up, at some point his dad had died. I'm sure that had a big impact on his life, but he's going wherever Abram goes. He's kind of connected with Abram. Abram's taking him under his wing. But here's the thing. As soon as they get out of Egypt and they kind of land in a place, within a decade, you don't know exactly how long this takes, but within a relatively short period of time, there ends up becoming all kinds of strife, creating all kinds of stress. Strife between Abram and Lot. He says, we need to come to a solution here. So, how do we handle our lot in life? Because most of us have that individual in our life. I won't ask you to raise your hand, but how many of you have a lot in life? Right? Don't raise your hand and don't point at your spouse. Okay. Now here's the thing. If you have a lot in life, that assumes that you are the Abraham in that situation. Or, if you're not, then you're also a lot. Now here's the thing. If you're with somebody and you're both Abrahams, you both have the character of Abraham, then you can be on mission together. If you have an Abram and a Lot, then that means you are in ministry for that person. If you have two Lots, then you're just in misery. So you're either in mission, or in ministry, or in misery. Two Abrams, mission. An Abram and a Lot, that means ministry, or two Lots, then it's just going to be misery. And if in your family situation, if in that situation you have with the person you're thinking about now, you're saying, oh, it's just misery, then maybe this is the time for our hearts to change. To say, God, I don't want to be another Lot in that situation. I want to be an Abraham. So how do I thanks a lot coming into this Thanksgiving? Ready? This will be so much fun. Number one, set boundary lines, not battle lines. Set boundary lines, not battle lines. Chapter 13, verse 8. Abraham comes to Lot, he says, let there be no strife between us. You see, what Abraham is doing is he's actually setting up a situation for peace. But here's the thing. Who was the decision left up to? Lot. Now that blows us away. Like if there's strife with somebody, if I know someone, you're the problem, you're creating the stress in this relationship, I want to make the decisions. I want to call the shots. But when you're dealing with a lot of strife and selfishness, here's the thing. You determine the outcome. The lot in life decides how it happens. You determine the outcome. So what is the outcome? The outcome is peace. That's what we want. So drawing boundary lines is more of a distinction rather than a division. It's along the lines of saying, it's not, here's the boundary line, and if you cross over that, I'm going to hurt you. You see, those are battle lines. Boundary lines say, okay, you're going to kind of live in that space, I'm going to live in this space, but the desired result is peace with us, not fighting. So the decisions of a lot in your life should not alter what you have determined for the outcome. What you determine for the outcome should not be changed by the decision of the lot in your life. See, my friends, this is what drawing boundary lines is for. Not to create fights, but to create peace. So draw boundary lines, set boundary lines, not battle lines. Second, focus on your future gain, not on your perceived loss. to the Jordan Valley. What was it like? For chapter 13, verse 10, it was well-watered everywhere, like the garden of the Lord. It was beautiful. And who got that beautiful space? Lot! What? Dying from us. I mean, friends, don't read this in a distant, disconnected point. I want you to engage in this. Be Abram for just a moment. Be Sarah for just a moment. What do you mean you're going to take that land? This is okay, let's say that you are a high executive worker. And you've been working hard and you've had someone that you've raised up underneath you. They've been with you the whole time. You've trained them, you've taught them, and then an opportunity comes. You can either take a Fortune 500 company or you can take a little startup. And you're like, all right, it's time for us to go in different directions. Okay, little protege, the person I've been raising up, Fortune 500, little startup. And everything you've got, the only reason you're successful is because I've been successful. What would you like to take? All the while thinking that person is going to take the little startup. No. No, they look at you and go, I'll take the Fortune 500. What? Okay, so this has a huge impact. What does Abram do? He goes to Canaan. He goes to the arid place. Why? Because he had already determined what the outcome was going to be. The outcome was not in the details. The outcome was in the results. There will be peace. And so Lot takes what seems to be absolutely beautiful, and what would appear to be, in that present moment, a huge loss. But Abram goes to Canaan, and the Lord speaks to him and says, I want you to look up now. Look all around. All of this, Abram, is for you. This is all going to be yours. I'm going to give it to you and your offspring forever. You see, because what Lot and even Abram didn't know at the time is that Sodom was full of wickedness and sin. You might have present-day beautiful game, but it comes with a fullness of sin and wickedness. So focus on your future gain, not on your perceived loss. With this individual, or with these individuals, because let's face it, some of you go home to your Thanksgiving meal, and it feels like you're in a family of Lots. And you may be the only Abram there. But the situation is for you to focus on what is the future gain. What is God saying to you about what He wants to give you in that time? Not in the perceived success of what others are getting right now. Maybe they win the argument. Maybe they win the day. Maybe the rest of the family agrees with him or with her and disagrees with you. Don't get caught up in the perceived loss. Stay focused on the eternal future gain. My brothers and sisters, this is not ignoring reality. Sometimes I know this feels like, oh, we just need to, ignore what's really happening. No, don't ignore it. But you have to put reality into the greater reality. Keep it in the story of eternity, not stuck in the moment. If that present moment is all you have, then I guess you're just going to fight tooth and nail for it. But if you can see beyond what God is doing, and how God is maturing you, and how God is working in you, then it's not about that moment. It's not about the well-watered land. It's about what God is doing and going to do in you and through you forever. Focus on your future gain, not your perceived loss. Finally, look to rescue, not retaliate. Oh, this is so hard. Isn't it? I mean, again, don't disconnect yourself and just read the story. Put yourself there. If Lot has been one where there's been strife and his responses were out of his own selfishness, I want this, go ahead, I'll go aid. You take the dry place, I'll take the beautiful place. This seems way more successful, and the decisions that they make are purely about themselves, for their own good, for their own benefit, without you in mind. And the moment comes when their life falls apart. Now come on. Isn't there a part that goes, that's what you get. You made those decisions. You wanted Sodom, you made your bed, sleep in it. Those were your decisions, not mine. Not my problem. Your life is falling apart. Hey, those are the decisions you made. Now, is that just me, or are others with me? There is a sense of, poetic justice is what we would call it. Oh, that's good. Others who are outside of Christianity would say, well, that's karma. Right? By the way, if you're in Christianity, it's not karma. Can we all understand this? Agree with this? It's not karma. Karma is a system of this idea that the universe is going to give you if you do good, you get good. If you do bad, you get bad. Well, how does that work with Abram? He did good and got bad. Okay? That's not a kingdom principle. That's awful for you. But this moment of saying, all right, you've made bad decisions. You've made decisions that have affected me, that have hurt me, that have put not only me, but my whole family. Right? I've never had to raise sheep and goats in an arid land out in the desert. I'm sure it's much easier in a lush land. But your decision has affected me. It's affected my family. Again, this could be a co-worker. The decisions you made. You cheated the system and got the promotion. That affects me. You lied about me, and now all of a sudden my job is in trouble. That affects me. That affects my family. It adds stress. It adds strife. And now things are falling apart for you. Ha, ha, ha. Good. Thank you, God, for dealing with that. But that's not what happens for Abraham. All the enemy, right, comes against them. They're completely wiped out. What does Abraham do? He calls his family together, who he's been training for a moment like this. Right? We're prepared. And we're going to go and we're going to rescue Lot. Uncle Abe to the rescue. It's not a retaliation. It's a rescue. See, because if you're Abraham to that Lot, then it's a ministry. It's a ministry. If you are another Lot, then it's just a mystery. We need to set down our minds, not backwards. We need to focus on our future gain, not our perceived loss. And look to rescue, not to retaliate. Just to keep this in perspective, Abram never stops worshiping the Lord in his smallness. You see that in Melchizedek. Abram continues in the covenant he has with the Lord. We see that in chapter 15. And Abram is never in a nice, comfortable place in his family. We see that in chapter 16. You see, a lot of times we think, well, I would be kind to Lot if everything else about my life is going well. Right? If my family is everything's good, but that was not the case. There was all kinds of pressure in Abram's family as well, and yet he still restless. There are no excuses for someone with a heart of faith. There are no excuses. You see, when we engage with a lot of our life, the issue is not to prove them wrong. The issue is for us to provide what is right. Peace as the outcome. A future gain. And a heart that says, I will seek to rescue, not retaliate. So as we come to communion today, we are reminded of this. Jesus is the greater Abraham. Ready? And I am the greater Lot. Well, I don't want to be Lot in this situation, but we have to be. You see, Jesus is the greater Abram, and I am the greater Lot. Jesus draws boundary lines. He is the boundary line, not of battle, but the boundary line of peace. Right? Jesus says in John 14, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. Is that the boundary line? Yes. And when we cross over that line, it's into peace, not war. I love Psalm 16, verse 6. Says this, the measuring lines have fallen for me in pleasant places. Indeed, my inheritance is beautiful to me. With Jesus, those boundary lines are in pleasant places. You see, it doesn't create division, it creates distinction. When we come over that boundary line, there is a distinction. We join with Jesus in peace, not strife, not selfishness. And yet, we as the greater Lot, how often do we continue to choose selfish ways? I won't ask you to raise your hand, but if you've been selfish this week, yeah, that reminds me, I'm kind of the greater Lot. Jesus is the greater Abraham. Also, his focus is on the greater gain. It was for the joy set before him. That was his focus. When he went to the cross, it was for the joy set before him. You realize in that moment when Jesus went to the cross for us, look, we look to Jesus and we say, we'll take the well-watered lamb, the garden of the Lord. You, Jesus, take the cross in my place. There is no one greater than Jesus. He is the greater Abram. And we looked at him and said, you take that cross. I will take life. But he did it, not in a fight, but for the joy set before him. It was the future gain, not a perceived loss. And it was a gain for the whole family. You, Lord, and all of your descendants, this will be for you forever. His focus was the joy set before him. You know, but for us, kind of like with Lot, he took what looked beautiful, but it was full of wickedness and sin. And how often we move to those things that look beautiful, but we know it's full of wickedness and sin. And yet we keep running to it time and time again. Why? Because it feels good in the moment. Whatever that sin is, whatever that wickedness is, we keep going to it again communion is no, remember me. Remember the body that I've given. Remember the blood that I shed for the forgiveness of your sin. That sin, that wickedness has been removed. And, there's Hebrews 12. And all of us have been in a place. Before Jesus, the enemy had wrecked us. He took everything we had. Our life, our possessions, all that we had was in the hand of the enemy. But Jesus didn't look at you and say, well, your decisions, that's how it works. No, he came to our rescue. He came and he rescued us at the cross. He wants to rescue you. Again, today, our salvation was not only what happened, but our salvation is happening now, and we will be saved. Amen? Amen. He wants to rescue you. Looking at Romans 8:31-32, if God is for us, remember, he's not battling with us. He's battling for us. If God is for us, then who could be against us? He who did not spare his own son, but gave him up for us all, how will he not also, along with him, graciously give us all things? You see, to be a person of rescue and not retaliation means that you're not battling with your lot. You're battling for him. And this is what Jesus has done for us. He doesn't battle with us. He battles for us. And if God is for you, then who can be against you? And greater is he who is in you than he who is in the world. Amen. So how do we deal with our lot in life? By allowing the one who is greater in you to be greater than the one who is in you. The goal is not to fight. The goal is to serve. Here's the thing we're going to find out about Lot. He never changes. Doesn't that stink? Lot never changes. My brothers and sisters, here's what we often do. I will do this so long as their morality changes. They need to change, and then I will be better. You need to change in order to fix what's going on here. And the reality is this: that Lot may never change. But if that doesn't change what we are called to do, and who we're called to be as the Abram in that situation. Where does that begin? It begins at the table of the Lord. Jackson read that song for us earlier. You prepare a table where? In the presence of the enemy. Lord, you have prepared the table right in the presence of the Lots. And you anoint my head with oil, and my cup overflows. Where does the table remain? In the presence of the enemy. Surely goodness and mercy pursues me all the days of my life. And I will dwell in the house of the Lord. How long? Forever. Right? That is a future perspective. That is a future